Hi everyone, my name is Alex and I am going to show you my summary. Second language acquisition is the process of acquiring any other language after your L1. Second has a constituting number 2 and a sequence coming after the first order. An example, second place. Language has a system of communication either spoken or written, consisting in the use of words in a conventional way, and acquisition as the development of a skill, habit, or quality, which is often related to an informal way of learning, but not really learning, it's acquisition. To explain the role of SLA in teaching, we need to consider the aspects of the language, which are morphology, phonology, semantics, and pragmatics. For the start, morphological awareness can help language students to familiarize with lexical derivations and with meaning or morphemes. And for the teacher, an awareness of English morphology enables them to help their students understand how words enter a language, what they consist, and how they are formed. Phonology helps students to recognize words and be able to communicate clearly and find differences between similar words. But as teachers, we can tell or specify different sounds and their meaning, and that makes us able to explain it to our students. Semantics makes the makes the students aware that language can have various meanings. Teachers need to explain that language is composed by different aspects, which can give different meanings depending on context. And finally, pragmatics makes students aware of social cultural complexity in the use of English, in which teachers need to make them know the different meanings around the world. Young children's language characteristics consist of involuntary crying, babbling, production of individual words, and at last telegraphic sentences, which are only two-word phrases for them to communicate, such as give me or let's play. Children have a peculiar form of acquiring communication skills in which they first learn to use negation, like when saying no to a bath or saying no to something they don't like to do or eat. Then they include don't, forming more complete but incorrect sentences, and after that, they include can't. Finally, somehow they use the correct form of the auxiliary. Later on, they start asking questions in which they only use a few words with rising intonation at first. After that, they use the rising intonation, but they add declarative sentences to rising intonation. Then they start using question structures, adding a question word at the beginning of the sentence without the subject and auxiliary inversion. In the next stage, they start inverting the auxiliary with the subject and finally learn to use negative questions. There are four common language acquisition theories that the first one is the behaviors theory, or in SLA called audiolingualism, is the one that the foreign language learner behavior is the organism whose behavior is being conditioned. And its behavior is, well, verbal behavior. The stimulus is what is thought to of the foreign language, the response of the learner's reaction to the stimulus, and the reinforcement is the approval of the teacher and the fellow students, as well as self satisfaction. This theory only stands with language learning as a habit formation. The second theory is called innatist theory, and Noam Chomsky is one of the authors of it. And he says that children already know how to speak, yet they don't have enough information to form complex grammatical sentences. He also says that there are inborn structures in our brain called language acquisition device, or LAD, which gives us natural ability to organize spoken language that we hear. The third theory of second language acquisition is cognitivism. This one focuses primarily on how learners acquire knowledge and how internal mental structures collect, organize, store, and retrieve information. And lastly, socioculturalist theory, which emphasizes the importance of interaction from rather a different perspective. This is a tension between external and internal language, with using language for thinking rather than action. This gap between child's actual development stage is called zone of proximal development, or ZPD. The distance between the actual development as an independent user and under group guidance. Now, Stephen Krashen's theory of second language acquisition. There are 5 hypotheses in this theory. The first one is the acquisition learning hypothesis, which states that acquisition is a subconscious and informal process of learning a language. That interaction is very meaningful and it has communicative act. And in learning states that it is a conscious informal process of learning, and it is more focused in grammar than in the communicative competence. The monitor hypothesis explains the relation between acquisition and learning and states that in order to be a proficient user of the language, you need to have both acquisition and learning. It also says that there are 3 types of users of the language. Number 1, the underuser, which is the one who is not much aware of the use and meaning of the language. It just talks nonsense. The number 2, the optimal user, is the one who has a balance of acquisition and learning, which makes him able to communicate more efficiently than the others. And number 3, the overuser. This is the one that is always checking for mistakes when talking and makes him not fluent at all. The input hypothesis states that in order to learn a language effectively, students need to have comprehensible input, which is the knowledge of the language just a little above their level, called I+1. The natural order hypothesis says that the student should be taught a language step by step, usually from the easiest to the hardest, in order to have an effective learning without being overwhelmed by so much information. The affective filter hypothesis explains that there are some factors that affect learning in the process. That affect learning process in students, which are motivation, self-esteem, and anxiety. And there is a last hypothesis called the reading hypothesis, which is basically the more you read by yourself. I think in this hypothesis called free voluntary reading, the more effective your learning would be. There is another hypothesis of second language acquisition that it's not from Krashen's, that is called the critical period hypothesis. And it basically states that there is a period between childhood and puberty, that automatic language acquisition is possible, and outside of this period it becomes potentially more difficult to acquire any other language. Learner language involves the student in the process of learning a foreign language, in which they can have some mistakes, but that is actually part of the process. So it doesn't really matter as long as they manage to correct their mistakes. They can have errors that involve their 2 known languages, like when they translate the literal meaning in their mother tongue to their second language. That is called interlanguage errors, because of the interference that there is between their 2 languages. And an intra-language error is made when there is a mistake because of the lack of knowledge of the complete rule. When a mistake is made when learning a language and it is not corrected, it is called fossilization, just for the fact that the student thought that the mistake was actually right and continued to make it, which now they just can't get rid of it. They can't learn the correct form. Natural settings is the context where the student is located when learning language, which could be a school, at work, or any social context provided by the native speakers of the target language being learned, of course. Structure based is the context where someone is teaching to a group of foreign language learners and it only focuses on the language itself, which is divided into communicational environment and content based environment. Well, I guess this is everything. So I hope I did well. And well, thanks for watching. Bye bye.